I'm a licensed clinical mental health counselor. That means I'm a licensed psychotherapist. I work in private practice in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. It's technically like my own LLC. I'm my own boss, I run my own business. And yeah, I'm pretty much my own entity in private practice. And one of the benefits of private practice is that per hour you keep every dollar you make from that session. Whereas if you're in an agency or a hospital or another setting, you're paying, reception staff, you're paying the part of the rent for the building, you're paying for that emergency services staff that's on call, So you keep a lot more of what you make when you're in private practice per hour, which makes it easier to work fewer hours and make the same. But there are certainly benefits to having all those, having somebody deal with all your scheduling, having somebody deal with emergency services.
Those are the trade-offs that you deal with. Yeah.
So, there's benefits to both.
This couldn't happen again.
I have an office in Portsmouth. I just I pay a lease every month. It's just like my own space. It's running your own practice. It's a little intimidating to set up, but once it's set up, it's really easy. The big things is you have to get liability insurance. So that's if anybody decides to sue you, you're covered. And that's a little confusing how to get that done initially, but once it's in place, you're like, you don't have to deal with it. Accounting, I have to get an accountant. I think you could probably do it on your own, but it's not too bad. So those are the really scary parts of setting up a practice. But overall, it's kind of a well-oiled machine once you get it going, and it's a really great job. It's really nice to be your own boss, and once you're licensed, you can kind of do whatever you want in terms of you can have a private practice, you can run groups, you can start your own agency if you want, you can oversee multiple clinicians. You can really, there's a lot of freedom once you're licensed, which is nice because you've worked hard to get there. You can practice with whatever population you want. I know clinicians that just practice with substance use disorders. I know clinicians that just practice with perinatal mental health, so that's postpartum depression, infant loss, those sorts of things. And you can also be specific about what you don't take on. Some clinicians, maybe don't have any experience working with substance use disorders, so that's something that they wouldn't feel ethically comfortable taking on. Or perhaps if you have never worked with postpartum mental health or something like that, that would be something that you would say, oh, I'm going to refer you to a colleague that's better fit for this. Your four-year college, you need, I think typically you just need to have taken an intro to psychology, and it can't hurt to have a couple other psych classes. And one thing that surprised me is every grad school wants you to have taken a statistics class.
Interesting.
Yes.
So a math class.
Yes, it's because you'll be interpreting a lot of statistics in terms of studies around the effectiveness of outcomes of certain things. To be honest, I don't use any of that in my life now, but in grad school you do have to interpret studies. That's part of the deal. When you're looking at grad schools for becoming a therapist, there's 2 routes. Oh, actually 3. So one is you can get a master's in social work. And that education process tends to be more focused on resources. It qualifies you to be a therapist like I am, but it also gives you some background in sort of case management. So looking again at more kind of systemic resources for food, housing, shelter, all that kind of stuff. So you can really go into more of like a social work,
Social needs in the community.
social needs,
yeah.
Or you can go just into being a therapist. You can kind of do both. So that's one avenue. You your master's in social work. Another avenue, which is the one I took, was I got my master's in clinical psychology. So that master's is much more focused on kind of what I do. So just more talk therapy, less sort of social agenda, resources based. It's much more kind of geared towards psychology, psychological studies, human behaviors. So one is not better than the other. So I'm an LCMHC, licensed clinical mental health counselor. If I had gotten my master's in social work, I'd be an LICSW. So those are the 2 master's level options. And then the other option is to be a psychologist, which is a much longer process. The master's programs are both 2 years, regardless of if you're a social worker or a clinical mental health counselor. To be a psychologist, it's a 4-year program.
For grad school.
Grad school.
So a total of 8.
Yeah. So after you graduate college, it's another 4 years.
Okay. Instead of 2?
Yes.
Okay.
So I actually did not know I wanted to be a therapist when I was in college. I was an art history major and hadn't taken any psychology. And then about a year after I graduated from college, realized I did not like what I was doing. So I ended up having to go to like a community college and take a psych class. I had taken statistics in college, so I had that covered. Specifically trauma based, I do have a few just sort of wild cards, but most of my clients have some sort of complex trauma history. Seeing clients for talk therapy, so I do couples therapy and individuals. I only see adults, I don't see children, so that's kind of the scope of my practice. I find a lot more requests for therapy from more Gen X millennial clients. Maybe that's just because I'm young and they tend to like want a young therapist. But I think people are just really open to mental health treatment now, and it's not like you have to have had this horrific life or have these really intense symptoms.
This couldn't happen again.
Therapy with children versus therapy with adults is very different. If you're going to be working with children, it's much more systemic. So typically it's not just the child that's the client. Usually you're looking at the whole family system. That tends to be more of a social work role a lot of the time too. So you're usually in touch with the schools, you're in touch with family services sometimes. People with therapists who work with children are incredible, and it's very rewarding work. And I know that children who are in need of therapy, it's really life-changing for them. It's just... goals. Yeah, I don't know. I think.
Does it ever like start with an individual and then all of a sudden you're seeing the couple?
So that's actually ethically a violation. For individual, it's unethical to then transition into couples therapy because you're skewed towards one person's view, right? You don't really know the other person's view like you know the person that's a client. You can go the opposite, so you can go from having a couple to just seeing one party per individual, but then it can never go back to couples therapy. I'll typically give an initial diagnosis. Most insurances require that for reimbursement, but it is, I think, good just to have something diagnostic to begin with, and that's really a starting point. Is typically that's typically about an hour, and it's not like a normal therapy session. It's a lot of questions, so I'll ask kind of presenting problems, what recently has led up to these problems coming about, and then I'll also get a lot of background, so sort of your childhood, any traumatic experiences, any learning issues. When I'm sitting across from a client, I'll ask, have you had these symptoms, hypervigilance, nightmares, frequent irrational fears, those kinds of things, because I know that those are symptoms of PTSD. You can do the same thing with major depressive disorder. Do you feel hopeless? Are you isolating? Do you have a low mood? Are you crying frequently? And typically clients will lead you to whatever direction their diagnosis is, but it's good to know, the symptoms. We draw our diagnoses from what's called the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, or the DSM. So the most current is the DSM-5, and that has, it's like kind of like a therapist Bible. It has every recognized diagnosis in it. So pretty much you can flip through that and you can see every acknowledged mental health diagnosis, and then there's a code. For each client I'll give them an initial diagnosis and a code, and then over time you can change that if you're noticing other symptoms are coming up. I see 5 clients a day. So my caseload, a full caseload ethically is about 25 clients, which sounds like, 25 hours, that's not full time. But when I'm at a full-time capacity, that's what my caseload will be. But at a full capacity, 25 clients is typically considered a full caseload because, that's a lot of people to kind of keep up with their stuff. B, clients do outreach you. It's during the week I'll get phone calls, I'll get emails. So they're, and that doesn't factor into that 25 hours of face-to-face client time outside. And then there's also documentation, which is every therapist's least favorite part of this job.
The other half of that time. Yeah.
So for every session, well, first of all, when you have an intake with a client, then you have to actually write an intake, document, and create a treatment plan. So that can take a little time. That looks like, writing their background up, writing their diagnosis, identifying treatment goals, identifying what meeting those goals looks like, identifying how long your projected so you do a treatment course plan initially, and then after every session you write a note. So that just kind of indicates presenting problems, briefly what you talked about in session. I usually write about 5 or 6 sentences, so nothing too elaborate, just kind of client continues to struggle with these symptoms, identifies progress in these areas, current stressors include, and then a goal for the week, kind of like what we hope to have accomplished for the next session. Treatment varies a lot for different people. There is more solution-focused therapy, which can be short-term. I don't tend to do a lot of that. That's very sort of concrete, and a lot of therapists really love that. because it's, it's a lot of like handouts, like concrete problem solution, very kind of, if somebody has just a single presenting problem, like I just want to stop this one behavior, it can be a very concrete, like, what we call cognitive behavioral therapy technique, which is what's the thought, what's the behavior, kind of like, what are you thinking, what's the outcome, how do we change that? And that can be very solution focused. I do some of that. I tend to do more long-term therapy. Most of my clients have complex trauma histories. That's just kind of where I focus my practice. So often I'm seeing people that have, some combination of childhood trauma, and that can compound into adulthood. Typically, people who have traumatic experiences, it tends to exacerbate as they get older. So I'm often looking with my clients, at a long history of traumatic experiences. And that can be more long-term therapy because often it takes a while to build rapport in those relationships. If people have had a lot of traumatic experiences in their lives, it can be challenging to develop that trust with a therapist. So for a lot of the initial work with clients with trauma histories, it'll just be kind of building that relationship. And so complex trauma may be a series of traumatic events throughout your life. A circumstantial trauma would be something like a car accident or surviving an earthquake or some natural disaster. And certainly people seek therapy for those things too, but that's somewhere where you might do more acute therapy. That's typically the outcomes are much quicker, the resilience level is much higher in terms of bouncing back from that traumatic experience, whereas complex trauma throughout your life is more of a long-term therapy. Psychodynamic. Psycho means, your thinking, your cognitions, and dynamic refers to the dynamics we learn growing up. So we all have sort of these fundamental dynamics in our families of origin when we're born. And the family we grow up in, we only know what we know when we're children. And those dynamics shape how we tend to act as adults. So attachment theory refers to your formative attachments. So, did you have a healthy bond with your caregivers? Typically people who have very healthy attachments early on in life tend to have healthy attachments in adulthood. People who have more complicated attachments, meaning inconsistent parenting, neglect, abuse, those tend to complicate our ability to have healthy relationships in adulthood. We kind of project onto the world our concept of relationships based on how we grew up. So that is super important to bring into both individual therapy as well as couples. In couples therapy, very often both partners are reacting not to each other, but to their own stuff about maybe what was modeled for them, maybe what needs they didn't have met earlier on in life. So really looking at the big picture in terms of family systems, dynamics, how do I perceive the world and why? And is that the healthiest way to perceive the world and react to it? So, for example, if somebody loses a loved one, they're really distraught, they're sad, that's not something I'm going to be like, oh, that's a chemical imbalance, right? Because it makes sense that that person's sad. It's another thing if it's a sunny, beautiful day in the middle of summer and, you're going to your friends' weddings and barbecues and you feel hopeless and you want to isolate and you're in a dark room. That's something where something chemical is happening because the reaction is not matching what the environment is supporting. So it's really important about teasing out kind of what appears to be a chemical issue and what appears to be circumstantial. But in those, grad school definitely trains you to be able to assess for that. And
Right.
because their symptoms tend to be much more exacerbated. If I'm seeing a client, that may have but a trauma history, that's not necessarily a chemical disorder, right? For something like major depression, that's a chemical disorder. So that's somebody I don't prescribe. So what I do is I have a relationship with several psychiatrists in the area, and I'll just, refer clients along if I think that they're a good candidate for medication. From getting the master's, or you can't as a psychologist either, you have to be a psychiatrist. So you have to go to medical school to prescribe medication, or you can be a nurse practitioner, which is, you get your nursing degree and then it's like a post-nursing degree. So again, in private practice, I think it's about knowing kind of, if you're gonna define yourself as an emergency clinician, that's one thing. I don't define myself as that. So I'm not somebody that takes on clients that are in active crisis. So that's something important to think about. Of course, crisis occurs. Nobody's immune to that, and that just comes with the territory. But I do always provide my clients with crisis lines. I always, if somebody is indicating some level of risk, we typically do what's called a safety contract, which will be, if X, Y, or Z occurs, I agree to call 911, or I agree to go to the nearest emergency room. So it's always about just having a plan in place when there are safety issues. But I think initially assessing for the level of need is really important in private practice, because you are solely responsible for your caseload.
Happen again.
It's really rewarding work. It's incredibly rewarding when you do build that trust with clients, and for the first time, often for some of them, they feel safe being honest about things that are very difficult or scary, and kind of like, in some ways, that exposure, that ability to share a traumatic experience that maybe has been buried, can be really freeing for people to just realize, like, it's okay to share with someone. For a lot of people, they've never had that experience. So it's definitely rewarding work.
That's
Really supporting people in wellness. It's so gratifying when you see somebody really change their lives. It's an incredibly beautiful thing to witness, and the fact that I get to call that my job, it's a blessing. It's really a beautiful journey